Welcome to It Takes Heart. I'm Sam Miklos.
And I'm Kate Coomber.
We hope you enjoy these incredible stories of healthcare professionals making a difference in communities across Australia and beyond.
Through our conversations, we look to celebrate the spirit of community and care.
We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land who have long practiced and shared ancient methods of healing, providing care and support for their communities with wisdom passed down through generations.
Join us as we explore what it truly means to take heart.
Guest today, Sonia Henry, is a physio turned rural GP and now the author of 2 books. Sonia is incredibly passionate about improving healthcare outcomes, particularly for remote Australia and First Nations people. She's also a huge advocate for doctors' wellbeing. Her most recent book, Put Your Feet in the Dirt, Girl, inspired me to create this very podcast. Sonia's honesty, humanity and care for others shone through the pages, and we so connected with her desire for health equity across Australia. Welcome, Sonia, to the It Takes Heart podcast.
Thanks. I really appreciate being on here.
I've got to tell you, you genuinely are like the inspiration. Kate and I had been talking about getting this podcast started, and we were sort of like, what's it about? What's it about? And these elderly neighbours that walk past my house every morning after like years of living in the neighbourhood stopped me and said, what do you do for work? And I said, I have a medical recruitment business. And they said, have you ever read this book, Put Your Feet in the Dirt, Girl? And I said, no, I've not. And they said, have you heard of Sonia Henry? And I was like, no. How do you not know her? I was like, I don't know. And the next day, they walked back past the house with your book, but they had it in this Ziploc bag as if it was their most precious book they owned. They said, you have to read this. You will love it. And I was like, okay. And honestly, like I couldn't stop reading it. And I said to Kate, I was like, this is what we were trying to get at. It's the stories, like reading the chapters of the places that you went to. They're the stories that we hear from our candidates all the time. And it's sort of going, that's what it is. It's just hearing the stories and getting people's awareness up around like these incredible communities that no one would imagine is there. And so many of our professionals, you know, who are in Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne, I just don't know. So thank you for that.
And then it's been shared around because I think just the knowledge that can be gained from all of your stories for our recruitment team and being able to talk to candidates really well about the locations and what to expect, I think is so valuable. Definitely.
Oh, cool. No, thanks. It's a cool story, actually. I like the fact that it was the elderly neighbours.
Yeah, they just love it.
Really cool. No, thanks. That's great to hear.
And I know in your book you talked about wanting to go to Europe, and you're joining us from Europe today. I guess, is this the trip
you wanted to do?
You wanted to do in COVID and then did it?
Get up in the Pilbara instead. Yeah. It's similar Portugal, right?
Yeah. I mean, well, technically Western Australia and Western Europe, the coast of Western Portugal, actually quite similar. I had some photos for the book taken, which was sort of amusing, that looked like I'm in Western Australia, but actually I was on the Atlantic coast of Portugal because the sun sets on the same side here.
Yeah.
So that's sort of funny. No, well, I have been to Europe since the book came out. But yeah, it's great to be back. I mean, I'm quite a nomadic person at heart, I suppose. I've always really enjoyed traveling. Europe is, you know, it's a beautiful continent and there's so many places to see. So it was, you know, the whole thing as it worked out that I then became very passionate about remote Australia. It's not something that I would have predicted for myself, but that's the beauty of life, isn't it? You never know where you're going to end up.
And what does, you know, when you're not traveling, how do you divide your time? Because I guess at the end of the book, I can't remember where you were right at the very end. And then like, are you back in Sydney? Do you then contract back to back?
Well, I've actually continued to work remotely since the book was finished. I mean, it was actually kind of funny. Like my book was launched, I did all this national media, which I was quite surprised by, actually, the amount of interest in the book. But, you know, it's really great. But then I went straight to like Broken Hill and then over to Western Australia for 3 months and worked in like the Kimberley and through the Coral Coast. And yeah, so it nothing really changed in terms of where I was working or what I was doing. And then we had this trip planned. So I still work. I guess I have kind of my favourite spots that I go back to now.
Where are that?
I really like the Kimberley part of Western Australia. I mean, I think everyone does. The scenery is really spectacular, and also parts of northwestern New South Wales I'm familiar with, and whilst the landscape isn't quite as startling as the Kimberley, there's great communities out there, and um, it's not so hard to get to, I suppose. Like a flight to Dubbo and a 2 hour drive is not quite like crossing the entire country from Sydney, and there's lots of different options. I mean, I got a text from a friend the other day who wants to now go and work, rurally, and I hope I've had some part in inspiring that. But yeah, I think you can work pretty much anywhere. But now I've sort of lost that need for new adventures, I suppose.
Yeah.
I sort of got returned to the same places.
And when you're in Sydney, are you practicing as well, or?
Well, I have a virtual job, which is very convenient, and also ties in a bit to the remote stuff because it covers a lot of the stuff we do is covering nurse-run small hospitals in rural Victoria who otherwise wouldn't be able to see a doctor. So I guess I haven't really let go of, I can do that from anywhere. So I do that part-time, and then I work when I plan to work, which is probably 3 to 6 months of the year in remote Oz.
Fantastic. So you started out as a physio and then went on to become a doctor. What was it that attracted you to healthcare in the first place? And then I guess why the transition from physiotherapy to medicine?
I've said this a few times. I was like, oh, my mum wanted me to be a doctor. And everyone's mum's like, it's not true. And I'm like, well, it's true. But I think a lot of people feel that way. But no, I was also, to be honest, I was also very interested in people. Like, I liked the human aspect of medicine. I was never that sciencey at school or anything like that. Like, I mean, I did well at science, but I sort of, my passions were much more in the humanities, like English, history. I've always been like that. But I like the human side of it. I like the diagnostic process as well. It's quite satisfying. But ultimately, patients are all people, just like doctors are all people. So without recognizing patients as human and understanding the human story, I guess it's hard to enjoy medicine without that. And I think if you like that, lots of doctors have been creatives like me, and I think we all enjoy that side of it. And, I met a lot of great people in training and that sort of thing. So, I guess that's how it all began. Physio-wise, I was very interested in sport when I was growing up. Like, I was pretty sporty, and I wanted to be a football, but a physio, sorry, it's early here. I wanted to be a physio for like a sport team and all that stuff. And I did that for a while, but it wasn't as glamorous as what I had envisaged. And then actually, when I started medicine, I ended up deferring for a year because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And I was going to go to Europe, and I had a job lined up with an offshoot of the English ballet company. I mean, this is many years ago now. Yeah, it was cool, actually. It was through a girl I knew through football, ironically, that I was doing the physio for in Sydney. And I broke my arm like 3 days before I left to try and ski the test to get onto the ski patrol down in Thredbo because I'm a keen skier. And I obviously couldn't work because I had a broken arm. So the uni sort of rang me when I was in Europe and were kind of like, well, what's your plan? Are you going to come back because you've deferred, or are you going to stay in Europe? And I was going to sort of say, look, I think I'll just give it up. But I then randomly went back to this ski resort in Switzerland and met a Spanish doctor who'd gone there for a mountain rescue course. And her name was Sarah, I still remember it. And she's told me all this cool stuff you could do with medicine and all the places you could see. And she's like, I think you should go back. And that's sort of what decided how I would return. And then it all happened like that.
I love when you can have such key people in your life that really do change the direction of what you...
Yeah, I've never forgotten her. Isn't that funny, that you met this random Spanish woman? But she was so nice and so real lack of ego, and we had a very interesting life. And then I thought I could have a life like her. And I sort of have, actually.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you might have.
Yeah, she's been my beacon all this time. But yeah, that's sort of how it happened.
I love the human element of what you're talking about. I think we've had some guests on the series who really talk about the human interaction with their patients are really the most memorable moments for them throughout their career, not necessarily always the clinical decision they made or something like that. It's really having those human interactions that really, I guess, drives the purpose and passion.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think there's many jobs where you do have as much human interaction, particularly being a GP, because I mean, obviously the patient's awake most of the time.
Yes.
So
Yeah. So,
you are able to interact with them on a more normal level, as in they're not lying unconscious in a bed and you're having to do something really dramatic or whatever. You sort of are able to talk with them about their life. And I think that real window is most unique to general practice.
absolutely.
And I guess how did being an author come about?
I always
Always a
wanted to
plan?
write books. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to do my whole life, really. I mean, that's what I imagined for myself. I wanted to be a writer, but like my parents sort of said, writers starve, doctors don't starve.
Yeah.
But some writers don't starve at all, but not quite there yet in terms of my being able to just write full time. The dream. No. And I always liked words and I really liked books. And I saw books as, I suppose, a bit of another world to escape into. And it was another thing, I guess, another window into a different place. And then it's very hard to become a published author. So that took many years to finally get a publishing contract. But then it did. And, I've had 2 books published, neither of which have been easy. I mean, it's a tough road writing a book and working full time. But, you'd have to be crazy to do it, as someone said, but then people are crazy, so they do it.
A third in the mix, so we expect.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to kind of go into like medical crime fiction, but I've only written 10,000 words because I've been kind of just too busy enjoying Europe. So, but that's definitely I've got to get back to it.
So, for those who have not read your book that are hearing this today, can you tell us how you went from working as a GP in Sydney to then exploring remote medicine? How did that come about?
Yeah, so I was meant to be, I'd finished my exams and everything. Like I finally got my fellowship and everything was, pretty good. And then I had decided to go to Dublin. I had a job lined up in Ireland. And then the international borders shut because of COVID, literally like 3 days after I had sort of sorted all of this stuff out. I mean, it had been a work in progress.
Yeah.
And then I sort of also at this point in my life where I just wanted to really get away for lots of different reasons. And then I was really stuck, and it was a terrible feeling to be so stuck because you sort of like, I mean, everyone felt like that during COVID, but it's such a strange situation, I think, for all of us. But particularly, I felt very sorry for people who, for whatever reason want to get away and want to do something different. There's always this moment in your life where you're like, this has happened or that's happened and I want to go overseas or I want to go over here, and suddenly you just can't. But anyway, so luckily being a GP, I did have the capacity to work. So I looked up pretty much like jobs remote Australia. I rang, I don't know, a few agencies and then I saw a job that said he's a solo doctor in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. And I was like, oh, yeah, that looks pretty far away. And then I Googled it and it looked like really far away. And then it kind of feels like a few days later I was on a plane landing in Perth, which was bizarre in itself. Obviously, flying in the time of COVID
Dublin,
is really
like 1 week, and then the next thing it's like Perth, like it's
yeah.
And flying
And
across
then Karratha.
was like lots of different countries, right? It was
It was
border
really
restrictions
weird.
state to state. It was like we were being run. Yeah.
Yeah, it was all, talking, you really hear about the term borders in terms of Australia, right? We don't really have, we're a giant island, right? We don't have borders per se, but it all felt very kind of World War II. This talk about borders and land and the separation between this state and that state. It was a really strange, so that was weird in itself.
Yeah.
And then getting obviously into the middle of the Western Australian desert was even weirder. But it was a bit amazing, really.
Did you feel, coming from practicing in Sydney to then the Pilbara, in those first few weeks of work there, did you feel clinically equipped? It's sometimes the things that you're faced with, and it's such a different role in some ways
To be the solo doctor.
Well, doctor.
I mean, that's a good question. Like, I suppose I didn't feel. I felt like my skill set was solid, but I felt that it was the access to imaging and the access to specialist care, and then also the realization of this sort of mythical idea of there'll be air support. You know, they kept saying there'll be air support. So you kind of imagine or conceptualize that there's this sort of fleet of planes arriving if there's a major problem, and the patient can be sort of whisked off. But the reality is it's not really like that. I mean, you know, the air support in whichever place you're in, whether that's like Care Flight or RFDS or, you know, there's lots of a few options, is that they're quite understaffed and they don't have enough planes, and then they're very busy. So, you know, the air support isn't probably going to get there as quickly as what you hoped. Not at all. So that was a shock. So there was sort of like this low level, it's very hard to see, especially if these patients are having to wait and unless they can get to Perth. But then you had your more acute scenarios where you sort of realised that you could do your best, but I mean, without the right equipment and the right sort of things, that if something were to go wrong, that would be very difficult. And it was, you know, like a few sort of hairy things happened, and I sort of got out of there before anything really catastrophic happened. But 6 weeks after I left, something did, you know, and yeah, like there's no sugarcoating that aspect of it.
How did you find, you know, going from Sydney, the razzle and dazzle of Sydney, to some of those remote locations that you worked? Did you find that a shock in itself? You know, some of those towns like the one IGA or like
the accommodation, even
amenities.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's not. There's a pub. Like the social
for what it's really like. I guess the things you maybe.
Like they still had the rosé, but it was renamed, I think. The pink wine, you know.
Yeah, the pink wine. Still call it that actually sometimes. I think it was. Look, I'm pretty flexible, and I understood that I wasn't going to, you know, the Sheraton. Like it was not the Four Seasons, but I found the landscape like very beautiful, you know, and I'm not a particularly precious person. So some places were better than others in terms of accommodation and that kind of thing. And, you know, you knew you were going into the outback, so you didn't really expect there to be like a Coles.
Yeah.
I had that idea. But then some places I went to after that, well, the remoteness, I mean, even when the Pilbara is extraordinarily remote. Like you have no concept of the space and the distances until you're there. I think there's a line in my book where I said you haven't seen land until you've seen some of the stations in WA, and that is, I think, still true. Like I'd seen land in New South. Yeah,
let's drive out there with your phone nearly going flat, and you know, just those things.
That concept of
preparing people to, you know.
It was all a bit slapdash. Yeah, I should have, looking back, there's a few reviews in my book. I don't normally read reviews, and actually the reviews have been very positive, but if you kind of nasty, like, I can't believe she went out there so unprepared. But I'm kind of like, you got no idea. Like, being a doctor, you're always unprepared. Like, I mean, these people seem to think we have this kind of like HR setup where there's like these inductions. I'm like, let's just try and be a junior doctor, sweetheart. Like, I feel like writing back to her. I was like, the whole thing's just a bit all over the place. But yeah, I mean, I realised how remote it was. But the isolation of the red earth in the Pilbara just stretching for miles. But it's also spectacular. So you kind of are in this sort of terrible fear, like, oh no, I'm really in the middle of nowhere, to also this real appreciation for this incredible old place that you're in. But yeah, obviously, I mean, when I worked through the territory and stuff as well, that was my most, I think, I've never seen such conditions like that in a first world country, you know, in Australia. That really shocked me.
I'd love it. Share. I think some of our audience may not really even understand. I think there's the location of being remote and the landscapes around you, but then the people and the communities that are there and the differences, I guess, of then being sent to, you know, hundreds of kilometres west of Alice Springs, or, you know, very, very remote, where you're in these communities, and
like the access to healthcare is
the access and the type of care, and working in Indigenous health specifically. Can you maybe share some real differences that you've seen, and what is it like?
I mean, because I worked in the Pilbara, which was a mining kind of, I mean, there were lots of actually First Nations or Indigenous patients there, but it wasn't, because it was a mining, there was a bit more money, it was a bit less Well, it's still very remote, but it didn't feel as neglected, I guess. And then I went to work across back over to the east, and I worked in northwest New South Wales it was a town, but it had been what was called a community. So it had only been in the last 2 decades again you transition from being an Aboriginal community to a functional town. For people who don't know, when they use this term community, it's almost like a euphemism to some extent. Some communities are very nice, and the people have, quite good quality of life, but across the board, they're kind of remnants of missions or reserves when the First Nations people were taken away and put into these setups. And they've sort of, I guess, it's persisted since that time. So the whole origins of that were pretty bad to begin with, right?
Yeah.
But then this town that I lived in, it was the health outcomes that really shocked me. It was the diabetes and my first patient there was like a 26-year-old who had a blood sugar of 32. There's a lot of ignorance still around Aboriginal health in Australia where people do say, and this really annoys me. I mean, not only is it driven by racial intent, I think a lot of the time, it's also incredibly ignorant when people are sort of like, oh, Aboriginal people, it's the alcohol or the diet, these tropes of it's their fault or it's your fault, But I mean, the thing is that simply physiologically at 26, even if your diet's appalling, which not saying necessarily this patient's was, your body regulates and you can process and you don't end up with raging fulminant diabetes.
Yeah.
And she did, as I saw lots of young people, because of this, sort of predisposition to that, which was what happens when you're forcibly removed from your land and then over generations are essentially force-fed the wrong foods. And then you get to this crux point where, but it wasn't just like these textbook statistics. Like I still remember calling my dad one night and like even the blood results were different. This sort of pro-inflammatory response is raised white cells, raised inflammatory markers that there was no real explanation for. Like I had a friend actually who had like really low ferritin but incredibly high hemoglobin, which is sort of, I can't remember quite the details, but it was physiologically almost like impossible to the point where the specialist at RPA got involved. And it was like, you kind of see this stuff sometimes in Nepal, like in high altitude climates. And I was like, are you related to Nepalese? She was like, don't think so, Doc. Like, I mean, it was, people don't understand medical issues that are facing Aboriginal people in Australia. And then couple that with being in the middle of absolutely nowhere with other stuff. Like there was no bus to get to the nearest major place, which is 450 kilometres away. There's no ambulance service out there in terms of New South Wales. Ambulance won't service that spot. So you can't just call an ambulance if somewhere is. You have to argue with some air support somewhere in a computer to come and get the patient. Like the whole thing was, so I rang Dad and I was like, I can't believe that there's people here who are suffering like this. I was in tears. It was really shocking. And I had to speak to a dermatologist about, there was syphilis, a lot of syphilis, because there was skin changes secondary to syphilis, which is also pretty rare to see. And he said he's seen leprosy out there.
Wow.
And it's certainly in the territory, which is unbelievable. So that was very difficult to get my head around.
And from what you've seen, what do you think can be done to bridge that gap? Like it's such a big gap that I think people aren't aware of.
Yeah, I think it's probably acknowledgement of the fact that there is this gap. And there's lots, like a friend of mine said to me who is Aboriginal, he said there's lots of things inside the gap. We kind of act like the gap is this empty chasm, but actually it's full of history and denial and lots of different things. We've got a lot of money in Australia, particularly like the mining companies and all our minerals and that sort of thing. Like actually we could have better health services if we really made a brave decision.
Yeah.
But we don't, there's a lot of it's so complicated and it's so difficult. But if you speak to the Aboriginal people, it's not really that complicated. They're sort of like, we just want like more doctors out here. We want better hospitals. We want cheaper food. Yeah, like stuff like that. Like there's shops out there that food prices are really jacked up, so you can't really just go to Coles and buy all your veggies because you're dealing with cost, and it's like this forgotten part of Australia, quite startling to realise that existed within my own country.
When you've gone into any of the new communities, how do you build trust How do you when they say, hey, when you're coming in, and if they haven't had a doctor for a while or they've had,
Multiple.
turnover of doctors, yeah, how do you get that trust?
I never really struggled so much with that just because, like, I think I'm a pretty kind of average person in the sense that I don't really think I'm better than the patients, or like I've always had a good ability to kind of merge with the place that I'm in and with the people. And I think patients are smart, like they're instinctive. They kind of pick up on whether you're going to be like, I'm the doctor in the ivory tower and you're my patient, because realistically, you're in a place that is so different to where you've come from. They're going to teach you more about it than what you're probably going to teach them. And also, I think I was so relieved to have someone there who actually listened to them. And,
Yeah.
um, and I was interested in them, and I was interested in their stories and their conditions and how to help them. So I look, yeah, sometimes you can come into towns and people can be a bit reserved, but that didn't take long for me for that to change. And I found it very easy to make friends, and that's what I liked about this kind of places is that everyone was actually very welcoming in the end.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Did you find you made networks, moving around from a couple of weeks here, a couple of weeks there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, definitely. I'm still friends with them today. So yeah, like it wasn't. I don't think that for me in terms of socializing. People say, "Oh, you get lonely." So some places are a bit different to others, but places like the Kimberley through WA and yeah, I mean, I've got friends all over Australia now. So I think that sometimes it's more fun than being in Sydney. A lot of the time it is.
Yeah, we've got people who say that sometimes when they're in the cities, people are isolated now, and sometimes when they go out more rural, remote, there's such a connected community out there sometimes, and people are making maybe more of an effort to get to know people, and they're feeling more connected than when they were in their city.
Oh, absolutely. Like I think that. I mean, particularly if you wanted a bit of a change as a GP, or doctors would move around, maybe emergency or GP, pretty much all the ones you can do it so easily. But if you're also like, I really need a change, I'm sort of at this point where my life's stagnating a bit for whatever reason. I think working remotely is such a great thing to do. I mean, not only for the fact you're actually helping people, but it's good for your own medicine and your own personal growth, I guess.
It sounds like you really you're probably testing your skill set when you're in some of these locations at times. But I think,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
yeah, do you think sometimes when you're in these locations, when you're not supported with all of the resources, your skill set is expanding constantly?
Yeah, it is. And look, that part of it is not, I've never been a hero or a cowboy doctor who's like got off on the remoteness and how hard it is. And I mean, all I saw was how unfair it was that these patients couldn't access the stuff that everyone could access in cities. And that's quite scary. But look, the help is there if you ask for it. It's not, I agree. It's not like you can just have someone run down and help you from but actually you'd be surprised and you can pick and choose where you go. Like, places like Kununurra had a hospital with lots of doctors. I had lots of colleagues where I worked, and it was very collegial, and, there was education and that sort of thing. So you can work your way up to some of the more remote locations. And also, simply because you're a GP, there's lots of choice. You don't have to go somewhere if you think this is going to be too hard and too dangerous. And that would be my advice, of course, is to always sort of figure out, maybe ask some more pointed questions, which perhaps I should have done.
Well, I think you're clearly very adaptable, and I think not everybody is adaptable and flexible.
No.
I think for anyone listening who thinks that maybe this could be a good option for them, I'd really be thinking about where they're comfortable, what do they need surrounding them, and then for someone to maybe map them to the right location and health service and time in their career, and they can evolve and go from there. But there might be a bit of a stepping stone to that.
Yeah, and if you're going for an agency, you need to have some really frank discussions. Maybe speak to previous doctors, multiple previous doctors who've been there, and also because it's totally different sitting in an office, sending people places to actually being on the ground there, working there. Oh yeah, I don't want people to think, oh, everything in remote Australia is so great and so wonderful. I mean, that's like a fictionalized version of the story. It's not like that, but there are. Like I said, there's lots of different options.
Sonia, what about, the well-being piece for, you're so passionate about well-being for doctors. Can you talk to us about what well-being looks like? What is what is it in wellbeing that you think we really need to be more aware of?
I think, look, doctor wellbeing has been a bit of a problem for years. I mean, I don't really think it's any better. I wrote an article in 2017 anonymously called "There's Something Rotten Inside the Medical Profession," which was a response to a spat of doctors dying by suicide, very young doctors. And there was lots of responses to that, and everyone went crazy. And, you know, the health minister sent me some response to my open letter, and when I didn't know it was me, obviously, I just read it on the train. It was like, you know, we're all really, this is really bad. But I'm on a medical council called New South Wales Medical Benevolent Association, which is a council that exists for doctors in distress.
Yep.
Totally confidential and stuff. And, you know, if anyone can ring up. But the amount of calls we're getting is only increasing.
Wow.
There's been lots of recent suicides of doctors in the last 12 months. That was sort of, I think hospital training programs are still very difficult. Being a GP is also tough, you know, like the media loves to jump on the backs of GPs all the time, and all of these things create these vortexes of stress and difficulty. And, you know, there needs to be lots of changes when it comes to looking after the wellbeing of doctors, but they haven't quite got there yet. There are some good initiatives. I think we need, you know, to open up the training positions. I think Australia also needs to change its attitude towards doctors, in a sense of there's a sort of like we all need doctors, but we're also like beating doctors down because we're perceived to be these really rich people in ivory towers, which is so far from the truth. I mean, your 60-year-old plastic surgeon from 30 years ago, maybe, but not the case these days so much.
It's that small percentage that they might be focusing on there rather than the
exactly,
because we want to be attracting people into this profession, right, and making sure that it can be a well supported, long lasting career.
And you know what, like I always say to me, I do quite a lot of talks for medical students, and I say the thing about general practice. I mean, look, people want to do whatever they want to specialise in, but the great thing about being a GP is you can create the life that you want. Yep. Which is actually much more important than what people understand. I mean, when you're 19 or 25 and you're at medical school and you're like, well, this is going to be this, that, or all the rest of it, but life changes and evolves, and flexibility, good financial, remuneration, and also the ability to have work whenever you need work is quite amazing, I think. And, you know, I've got some friends who have quite high-powered jobs in London and that sort of thing, but they're nowhere near the job stability that you have as a general practitioner.
When you talk about changes that need to be made, what are some of the changes that you think could be made to just create better wellbeing for the doctors?
Oh, they need to be much more practical. Like I said, they need to open up the training spots for the colleges, so then people can't be stuck being unaccredited registrars for like 10 years and then still not getting onto a training program. Okay. I mean, stuff like that. Yeah. And there needs to be, I think we also need to acknowledge the GP shortage in Australia. Like the governments need to acknowledge it instead of sort of, because people don't want to do GP training because they're paid less during the registrar years than in the hospital. I think they are changing some of that. I think it was my dad sent me an article that Queensland and Victoria are changing their awards or something. They need to do that in New South Wales as well. I think we need to acknowledge we've got a really severe shortage in Australia of doctors, and no one can replace doctors. Like we've got all this sort of pharmacy prescribing nurse practitioners, which, you know, nurse practitioners are great. I'm not so keen on pharmacy prescribing, to be honest. Yeah, but they're not, it's not like being a doctor. You don't have that kind of training. And I always say to people who would counter that, I'm like, look, you're perfectly welcome to go and spend 50,000 years at uni and then 10 years training and doing a very expensive fellowship. Like, no one's stopping you from doing that. And until you do it, you don't know the breadth of knowledge that you require. And I think we need, as a country and as a government, is to acknowledge the shortage and to actually either, you know, fix a pay structure, make conditions more attractive. If we want doctors to work remotely, we have to have much better infrastructure out there, really, to attract people long term. But I've been interviewed by regional health ministers, and all of these things are what people want is practical solutions, and that's usually driven by money and politics.
Yeah.
Whether that'll change, I don't know. But in the meantime, you can still enjoy a very satisfying life as a doctor But you just have to be aware of these issues and work your way around them.
And it sounds like find the right place for you and varying experiences subject to where you are, what the health service is, what the resources are, and find what it's going to be very bespoke for everyone.
Yeah, but you have the capacity to find that bespoke experience if you like. So funny is the word bespoke in relation to remote outback Australia. Anything out there that doesn't use the word bespoke.
Your word to use. Bespoke.
Yeah,
next enjoying Australia.
I mean, like friends and stuff who work in Broome and live there, and they'll live there for the rest of their lives, and they love it. And I can see why. Broome is a fantastic place.
And there's lots of
it's fantastic. Yeah. So, you can make it work very easily. You just have to have the guts to kind of step outside your comfort zone, I guess.
Definitely. Well, look, for every guest that's coming on the show, we're raising a bit of awareness for a charity of your choice and donating $500 also. What's the charity for you today, Sonia?
Well, I mean, I've actually already spoken about it. So my charity of choice is the council that I'm not a board member, a council member of. We don't have a board. It's the Medical Benevolence Association of New South Wales, which is they hate the word secretive, but it's just because it's been around for 150 years, so their marketing hasn't been that great. I mean, our new executive officer is excellent. But it's a council of doctors, some specialists, some GPs. Also, GPs are specialists. I should not say that. And they've been around for years, where they devote. It's a totally not-for-profit charity, and we have meetings every month where we just go through cases of doctors or family members of doctors who have called us up who are in real distress, be that financial, emotional. The council actually provides really practical solutions. We fundraise. We have like social workers on board. We have a financial advisor, and certainly, if you hear some of the stories you realise that doctors aren't living this dream life that everyone thinks that they are. And it's a great cause. It's totally managed just by these. I think there's about 10 of us, 12 of us on the council, and it's no one's paid or anything. It's literally just a council to help doctors who feel they have nowhere else to turn.
Yeah, what a fabulous
so
shot.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great organisation. I'm very proud to be part of it. Actually.
I was just going to say, proud to be part of that. It's really great to hear it. And hopefully from today, we'll be able to shine a little bit of awareness as well. Like where you say it's secretive, like to get a little bit of marketing in that direction.
Yeah, even with our team, making sure that they know to be letting our doctors know that this service is available.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a Queensland branch and there's a Victorian branch, but I don't know how much we communicate with the branches, but Louise, who's our executive officer, she knows all that stuff.
Fantastic. Sonia, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to speak with you. We both really enjoyed the book, and we so appreciate you jumping on it. It's like 6 a.m. or something for you there. Like you're like on and so fresh. We really can't wait to see the third book. And
thanks, Ate. It's been great. Thanks very much for the talk, and good luck with the podcast.
Well, thank you. If you're in Brisbane, you must pop in.
Oh, I will. I've got a few mates up there. I like Brisbane. It's a great town. It's really come on in the last 10, 15 years. So many cool restaurants and definitely. No, thanks very much. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Enjoy your trip.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to share, rate and review. This allows us to reach more people and share more incredible stories. Click the follow or subscribe button to ensure you never miss an episode.